Hello again. Stu Kinniburgh here. Welcome to another class from Foundations for Life. In our previous class, we were talking about salvation by grace, and we had gotten to the point where we started talking about a concept called regeneration. So let's dig into regeneration just a little bit. We said that regeneration was instantaneous change from spiritual death to spiritual life. And remember, in one of our previous classes, we talked about what spiritual death was and how there was no resurrection from that without spiritual life. And so the idea here is that with regeneration, we have a new nature. This is from Ephesians 4:24. So sometimes there can be a drastic change in attitude. I mean, you hear about people who say, I was saved and it has completely changed my life. I was used to do bad things and I used to pick on people, or I was a bully, or I was a criminal, and now all I want to do is live my life and dedicate it to living for Jesus Christ. But they all are nonetheless fantastic stories because it means that a person now is living for Christ where they didn't used to live for Christ. But there is a capacity with this new nature for a victory over sin. Before the idea of regeneration, you did not have a capacity to have victory over sin. And so now you do as you are regenerated. The other issue, a spiritual experience. Ephesians 2:1-3. The idea that I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. The idea that you were blind, but now you're no longer blind. You can see. You're aware of the life that you are living and your desire to live it in a different way. So where once you were estranged from God, now you've got fellowship with Him. You are connected to Him. And so this is a major difference. This spiritual experience changes things for you. And then the idea of eternal security. This is from Philippians 1:6. Eternal security, it means that it is not possible to defect from the faith. Not possible. So this is a big deal for a lot of people who want to know, once I'm saved, how do I know that I can continue to be saved? Is there some sort of security for my salvation? Or do I have to keep plugging away at something, keep doing things in a certain way in order to make sure that my salvation is secure? Now, we're going to talk a lot about eternal security here in just a little while. So I'm going to jump off of that, and we're going to go forward and talk about one other thing as we get into this whole idea of salvation and whether and where that eternal security comes from, because that's got to be the foundation for it. So when we talk about salvation, there is a term that's used often in the Bible called election. And you find it in several different verses that God elects those that He saves to a life that is destined to be with Him. So the idea of election. So what does that mean? Because this is where we get into some of these issues that can be a little confusing and actually generate not just even a small amount of confusion for folks that are trying to explain the concept of being saved. So election really boils down to one of two concepts, either foreknowledge or foreordination. Foreknowledge or foreordination. So let's talk about these. Foreknowledge. Foreknowledge would state that God invites everyone and that God beforehand knows who are going to accept that invitation. So God lays out the table for all to choose, and He knows, because He is infinitely wise and infinitely knowledgeable, He knows those people who were going to choose Him. And so He takes those people and He does what we call predestines them in order to choose him. So he says, I know you're going to choose me. So now I am going to, in my power and authority, I am going to predestine that to be taking place. So the idea that God knows what will happen, but he does not cause it to happen. So what the death of Christ does in this case is it secures the possibility for sinners, generally, which might never be realized. So this is the concept of foreknowledge. Now, when we get to the idea of foreordination, there's a few differences. The first is that the concept of election is an unconditional decision that is made by God. So the eternal destiny of man is determined by a sovereign choice of God. Now, what this does is this means that redemption is certain and secure. But think about it for a minute. If your redemption is based on some sort of decision or statement or act that you would make, in particular, that you might have to continue making in order to be certain of your security, then how certain is that security? Whereas if your redemption is based on an unconditional decision made by God, and that he has chosen you, then that redemption is secure. You never have to worry or think about whether you've lost this salvation or it isn't effective. Basically, it was God's choice to choose you, and as a result of that, that choice is a done deal. So on the cross then, Christ's act of saving is apart from anything that a man does, because God says, I'm going to choose this person and I am got to have some way to pay the penalty for that sin. So as a result of that, Christ has to pay that penalty. But once that penalty is paid, it's effective in the life of that person that I want to be saved. So that's the idea behind foreknowledge and foreordination. So let's go back and talk. And now this is going to play a little bit later in our discussion, but it's important to understand that when people are talking about election and they're talking about ways of methods of salvation, whether it's free will or whether it's something that God does, all of that boils down to this conversation we just had on foreordination or foreknowledge, because it has to be one of the two. There's no other way that it could be. So let's talk about election, and we're going to go to Ephesians 1, 4 through 6 to start our discussion, okay? Now, in Ephesians 1, 4 through 6, let's read that. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. So, there's a lot of meat in that verse. But basically, it says first that God chose. And so what that means is that he had the opportunity to make a choice, to choose out or to select. If in the book we have an example of if I said, let's go to the movies tonight, and you've got a choice of watching Superman or Batman or Ant-Man. Ant-Man was a very good movie, by the way. Very much underrated. Very, very funny. Anyway, you had a choice of those three movies. Which one do you want to go see? And you said, I want to go see Batman. And then we show up at the movie theater, and lo and behold, Batman isn't showing, just Superman and Ant-Man. Well, you chose Batman, but did you really? Because you can't go see Batman. It wasn't, It may have been on the marquee, but perhaps the film isn't showing for some other reason. The point being, in order for you to actually choose something, those choices need to be available to you. So in the case of election, with regard to the foreknowledge or the foreordination, if God can choose, as it says here in the scripture, he chose us in him before the creation of the world, then he has to have those things available to him to choose from. And what foreknowledge says is that, no, he knows who's going to choose him, and so he predestines those people. He doesn't choose from all of mankind. He only chooses from a subset of that group of mankind. So that's the idea of the choosing. Though there must be things from which to choose, he has to be able to make a decision, and those things that he chooses have to be available. If they're not, then he's not truly choosing. So let's look at the idea of choice, because this is where a lot of people have concern, is the idea that God's going to choose. I mean, that doesn't seem reasonable. It's not fair. It's not loving for God to be the one that chooses. So do we have in Scripture some sort of indication that God does choose somewhere, somehow? So yes, if we look at Genesis 12, 1 through 3, the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Is there any doubt in that reading that God chose Abram for this purpose and had set it up so that he would be successful, to make that choice effectual? How about choosing of Isaac? Then God said, "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." So the idea there is that God chose Isaac. He could have chosen anybody he wanted to. He didn't choose Isaac because he knew that Isaac was somehow going to do something that warranted that choice. He simply chose Isaac. And in the New Testament, John 6:44, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up at the last day." So the idea here is that men are drawn, that he chooses them because he draws them unto himself. The idea from John 15:16, let's read that. "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit." So there again, we see that God chooses, that it isn't up to us to make that choice, and that believers are elected by God. So that's enough for this class. When we get together again, we're going to talk a little bit more about election and take it to kind of another plane, so that we can really fully understand this concept. So thank you for watching. Again, my name is Stu Kinniburgh, and I look forward to getting with you in our next class.